All right, welcome everyone. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Nice to see everyone. Up first is our consent agenda. We have our prior minutes. We have a number of first read policies as well. No second read and that policy to be removed. Any discussion, questions about the consent agenda? All right, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda, and we'll do that by roll. Erin?
Aye.
Kat?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Akua?
Aye.
And Mary is an aye. I don't believe we have any need to prioritize the flow of the meeting, eh? Okay, we have no visitors.
We have one
Here.
visitor who's coming on right now.
Oh, okay.
Named Catels, I'm not sure who it is.
You said, what's the name?
It just says Catels on it.
Oh, I see that. Are you able to hear us, the visitor in the virtual world? You're coming up as Catels. Do you want
I
to?
think it's Stacy's man, ready, and she's here, gonna present, so just listen.
Okay.
It's a really nice supportive
Oh,
family.
that's lovely. Okay.
That's great.
So then
Thank you for joining us.
I'm assuming they're here to support and don't have any comments.
Oh, they're gone now. Oh, no.
Oh, I
They're
didn't.
like, oh my god.
Oh, I'm sorry if we scared them away.
It's okay.
If you want to message them and tell them how they could need to rejoin us.
So, that was cute.
That is cool.
That's super cute. Okay.
I actually think they're having internet problems because this is the second time.
It's not that I scared them off. Okay. All right. Well, so moving on then, we have our spotlight tonight with Michelle Taberge.
Okay, so I've talked about the alternative programs to all of you in the past, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time to give you more information in regards to the financial aspect of our programs, so you can move forward. So, okay, keep going. So just to review, FNESU has 4 alternative programs. RISE is the K-5 program for students with developmental delays or intensive academic needs. The program emphasizes unique and effective methods that we employ. We're using something called the Rethink curriculum, which is for students with autism and developmental delays. TAPS is the second program, and this is for students in K-6 through 12. And this covers a wide range of essential skills, including communication, decision-making, problem-solving, time management, interpersonal skills. The program focuses on real-world applications of functional life skills, preparing students for various aspects of daily life and future challenges. And then the one that I think I've spoken the most about, which is the STEPS program, which is our behavior program that's designed to address specific behavioral challenges or goals. We use evidence-based strategies or therapeutic approaches to ensure effectiveness and behavior modification. It's to come and help modify things for us. We tailor behavior plans to the unique needs and circumstances of each student, demonstrating a personalized approach to intervention, and we integrate skill-building components to enhance students' abilities to manage stress, cope with emotions, and communicate effectively. Just some demographics. So RISE has the capacity currently to accept 10 students. And right now we have 5 behavior technicians, 1 special educator, and a half of a BCBA that spends half of their day there.
Can we just clarify that with the BCBA?
Sorry, the board certified behavior analyst. The person that is helping analyze the behavior, creating plans, and in RISE and TAPS, it's a little different. They do a lot of discrete trials, so working on a single skill and then reinforcing the skill and then adding on new skills. So that happens between RISE and TAPS, and TAPS is the 6 through 12 program that the RISE feeds into, and we again have the capacity for around 10 students. There's 5 behavior technicians, 1 special educator, and then the BCPA is shared between RISE and TAPS. I think I'm gonna change the name to all RISE because it's so confusing, like now that I have them all in Enosburg, but that's for a later conversation. And then steps right now currently, which I think it has grown as of tomorrow, but I think there'll be 18 students there. And right now they're from kindergarten to 10th grade. We have 8 behavior technicians, so 4 on little steps, 4 on big steps. 1 board certified behavior analyst, 1 behavior specialist, 2 special educators, and then we have what equates to 0.6 of a school psychologist for therapy.
Michelle, just to clarify, you said capacity, but those are our actual numbers. So all of these programs are currently at capacity?
Except for steps, like the goal is 10 and 10.
Okay.
So
You could do 3 more.
I could probably do 3 more. My staff probably would.
Gotcha.
Say wait a little bit, because I've just recently added some people and I've also transitioned some students out, but 20, 10, 10, 20.
Gotcha, okay.
Okay, so we wanted to show you a cost comparison. So we chose 3 alternative programs that students in FNESU have attended in the past. So as you can see, SOAR Learning Center has a total cost of $84,462 per student. Laraway's cost is $100,547 per student. And then Bell-Kate's cost was $127,310 per student. I'll just give you a second to look at all the numbers. I just want to note that you can see that the transportation was a large part of the cost. Bell-Kate alone was $43,000 to get to Chittenden County from one of our towns. Here are the costs of students attending FNESU programs. So RISE TAPS cost is around $40,628 per student, and the STEPS cost is around $47,629 per student. So if a student was at Bell-Kate but can now be in the TAPS program, this is an average savings of around $86,682. Or if a student was at SOAR Learning Center and is now in STEPS, this is a savings of around $36,933. Oh, sorry. Before I get to that part, one of the benefits of having our students in our community, besides the financial aspect of the transportation cost goes is much less, is the fact that we can work flexibly with school teams to transition students back into their setting schools. So we're able to do this in small steps with the adults that they're familiar with, supporting them in their setting schools to ensure their success. We also thought it would be important just to share some families' perspectives and thoughts on the shift to our own FNESU programs. And this is Stacy Cattell-Godin. She's one of the assistant directors of student services, and she agreed to join the meeting tonight to share some of these thoughts in person with you.
I want to take a minute to highlight the experience of one student that currently attends TAPS. She's a 7th grader that was at SOAR previously for 4 years in their life skills program. The team did not want her to come to leave SOAR, so she was making progress there. They didn't want her to leave. I took 2 years, like planning, meetings, visits, come see her, what we have to offer. So she came, this is her first year this year as in TAPS. and she is thriving. She is in band, she's in chorus, she did track, she went to her first dance on Friday. A pretty big deal, huge deal. So her family is proud of her, and she made humongous gains in our program. So we actually had a meeting last week, and her DCF worker said that she stopped in to visit TAPS during the school, kind of like last minute to check in, and she was in awe of the space and how the student was involved in the classroom. The student was happy to see her, and that she just was very impressed with our program. And then that same student's foster parent said that she's made humongous gains in our program, socially, emotionally, just like academically, all around, and they cannot be happier with how it's going. So she's in her hometown, and she's thriving. So it's pretty cool. Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
I just want to say, I work with colleagues from all over the state, and everyone is contending with the loss of resources when it comes to alternative programs and placements for kids. Pre-COVID, there was a certain level of resource. Post-COVID, it's significantly diminished, and it was already diminishing pre-COVID. So there are just very, very few options out there, and because of the hard work of Michelle and her team, we've been able to stand up in not a lot of time our own in-house alternative programs. And as you can see from that data, we're serving nearly 40 students who otherwise would be struggling to maintain within the least restrictive environment of the public school classrooms, or they'd be on a wait list to get into an alternative program. We've seen some wait lists be as long as 2 years. We've seen some students just outright be denied entrance into school. So there's that piece that we're able to provide access, but the other piece that Stacy was talking about that I think is really important is that it's in our community. And one thing that Michelle and her team are able to do is when a child starts to be ready to transition back, they can do it in a really data-driven, slow, responsive way so that the child can go in, experience some success, come out, go in a little more time. When we're in an outside placement, it's just you're done and now you're back in school, and it's not as seamless in terms of a transition. So
do like a 6 to 8 weeks. So like, okay, we're gonna go try like an elective, and then if that goes well, then we're gonna add a preferred class. So maybe I'm really good in reading and I want to join that class, and when we see success in that, then we'll put a non-preferred class until they are slowly back in there full time.
Students in TAPS work at Ace Hardware and Flying Disc and Flower to Flower. They're in our community working in jobs like this. It's like so cool to see they're happy.
They just created a map of each of the community, and yeah, we're doing some pretty great
pretty cool
things.
it's great. Thank you all for your work.
Yeah, bravo. It's really amazing, and I know that it's serving as a model for other systems, I mean, which is just adds to how impressive it is. And I remember in the early days when we started talking about this and really identifying the lack of outdoor or out of district placements, and what a difficult situation it was. So it's just super impressive to have kind of grown this from the ground up and now be serving as a model for other systems across the state.
I also have to thank a lot of people in this room because it wouldn't be happening without Dawn, without Heather for summer programming, without Gab for constant, and Vern for
It's a good
keeping the
it's a
place
good team
together.
effort for sure.
And then Morgan, who I keep asking for things, so yeah.
So the other piece that I think is noteworthy is that even when we began this, we still had students in alternative programs, and what's that number look like in terms of who we still don't have the who? Zero.
We just had a new student that moved to our district that was from a different district, and we talked about our program. They wanted to come see it, they came to see it. And
they were at SOAR and now they're with us. Yeah.
So it's remarkable when we're talking about this as a state, and I say we have 0 students in outside alternative programs. People do a double take. What was the number? 0. So it's still, they're doing a very, very impressive service for our students and community.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
One question here, when there is capacity, do we take students from other districts as well?
We haven't gotten there yet. I feel like I know about other students within our community that are coming up, and I don't think that I've had the ability to do that yet.
Okay.
Once we get to capacity though, when we're kind of in a place that I do think we'll get there,
I think
where,
so too.
you know, with the increase in services and, you know, some of the things that we're building into our systems, that's something that our policy would allow us to receive tuition from another district that didn't have a like program, but right now we have to make sure that our program is meeting our students' needs, and then we can look at it. I mean, Michelle's getting calls all the time, like, can you take
It's
this
mostly
child?
staffing, like, people are having babies, so I gotta wait for them to come back and
Right.
that sort of thing. It comes down to the people, yeah.
That's great, I appreciate you sharing that. I can imagine, since we do have this here, that you must be getting calls from other districts that are saying, oh, can we place?
I'll show you anything.
We actually had a pediatrician call.
Yes, UVM doctor
Yeah.
called and said, I heard about this program, could you tell me about it, and what is it like, and wanting to know if their patient would fit in this program. So, yeah,
Not yet.
not yet, but maybe someday, right? At least it's getting up there, so.
Yes, for sure.
Thank you both so much.
Thanks for coming.
Morgan, you're up.
I just have other, and I'm gonna jump in on Lynn's discussion around Act 127 for the one kind of update that I want to give folks.
Okay, great. So Lynn, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. He's gonna drive the slideshow. I'll start with a report on personnel. So,
I have to go back.
it's okay. Most of the information is the same as what went out in your board packet, and all but one piece that I had to add today is informational. So, one of the things that I had to add today is this board has an unpaid leave request for Carrie LePan, who actually is out of personal time and was relying on a flight to get back that didn't, so can't utilize other leave for that. So Carrie's asking that the board approve one unpaid day for not having a flight to get home.
Sure, any discussion from the board on that? All right, I'll make that motion to approve the 1 day of unpaid leave for Carrie LePan. We'll do that by roll. Kat?
Aye.
Erin?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Akua?
Aye.
And Mary is an aye.
So next, we need to talk about this time of the year. You've heard this in your local board meetings. I think all of you have. This time of the year, we have to think about whether or not we'll notify the union that the board could contemplate a reduction in force if they need to. So this is a discussion that we have every year. Historically, the boards always say we should notify the union that we're contemplating a reduction. We may contemplate a reduction in force, because you never know what's gonna happen when it comes to bringing your budget to the voters. Last year, given the situation that we were in terms of the workforce landscape and the amount of turnover that we were anticipating, the board chose not to send that reduction in force. There is volatility that you'll hear about later in terms of Vermont's education funding system. And I think that I'm going to recommend that this board follows the suit of the NMB and the ER board and directs me to write the letter to the union that says we are contemplating a reduction in force. It doesn't mean any reductions are coming, it's just leaving the door open in case the board needed to use that later.
Yeah, absolutely. Any discussion around that with the board? I certainly think, given the landscape right now, it makes sense. So I'll make that motion to approve, Lynn's ability to, to contemplate the reduction in force.
Send the notice to the
Yeah,
union.
to send the notice to the union. By roll, Pat?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Akua?
Aye.
And Mary is an aye.
The next two are, I would like to go into executive for both of the next two, the teacher retention strategic plan and for the administrator negotiation, so I wonder if we could save those
Yeah.
until the end of the meeting.
Yeah, we can do those at the end and let everyone get home.
Okay. So next up is about contract issuance. So we, because of a change in language in our master agreement, are able to get contracts out that first week in April, and this board won't actually meet again until the middle of April. So I'm asking the board to make a motion to grant me the authority to issue teacher contracts, teacher administrator, and central office contracts for the 24-25 school year.
Any discussion from the board on that?
I can make that motion.
Great, we'll do that by roll. Kat?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye. Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Akua?
Aye.
And Mary is an aye.
I just wanted to let you know that we are in the curriculum director hiring process. We have had one meeting with our screening committee. We have our second meeting tomorrow, and so we'll be digging in and looking at candidates tomorrow and deciding the process for who's going to go through to the interview process for the screening committee. So I just want to remind the board that we set a date of January 30th at 4:30 to have the board's interviews for this curriculum director position. So I'll have Courtney send out, we just need to confirm that because by next week I'm gonna wanna notify those candidates and we need to just confirm that because we will likely have an opportunity for some of our stakeholders to meet those candidates in advance of the board meeting. So we'll look for confirmation that we can get a quorum.
And then Lynn, I was looking at the timeline for that search, and you'll be in touch with the two of us
Yes.
when it's time for us to plug in around reference checks and
Yes.
such. Okay,
Well,
great.
I'll know more after next week when we are down to the finalists.
Okay,
So I'm gonna ask that we skip the board monitoring plan for now. Honestly, I didn't embed it, and I'll try to send that to you. So actually, the second part, the provisional comparison data, I was going to pull that from the AOE because it was a report we used to receive. And Jamie tried to find it today, and the AOE said it's not a report that they do anymore, so we don't know if it was a legacy report that I remember from someone who previously used to report on it at the agency, but they don't produce it anymore. The portrait of a learner. So this was a conversation that began, I want to say, 4 years ago. We have been working towards building our own portrait of a learner, and we've been working towards our board goals and how they connect to our portrait of a learner work. So this was part of your board retreat. We really dug into, we talked about the portrait of a learner, and we talked around the intention of that portrait of a learner. So I just want to ask the board, we have Gab here who's probably most intimately connected and knowledgeable about the portrait of a learner work. So she can answer questions that the board has, but what we're hoping is that we could reaffirm our intention related to the portrait of a learner work with clearer language. Because the language that we wrote in the board goal was a little less than clear. So it's been something that's been interpretable in a couple of different ways. So we've worked on some proposed language that is a little cleaner. So the class of 28 I know our board goal says 2027, but we are not able to accomplish the 2027 because we would have had to start with this year's ninth graders. So it would be the class of 2028 and beyond will use a body of evidence from courses and or flexible pathways to demonstrate proficiency in the portrait of a learner indicator skills required for graduation. So I wonder if anyone has any discussion or questions. Or if Gab, is there anything that you'd like to add that I didn't say?
I don't think so.
Lynn, are we not then discussing any further, the change to the way that it's presented as far as traditional grades versus the other system you talked about before?
Can you say that? You cut out a little bit, Kat?
Sorry, I can hear myself too, like an echo in your room when you talk. Is it better if I send it in the chat or can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, I just wondered, are we not then discussing and the whole idea of changing the, I can't remember the terminology, but the system of how the grades are done, like the more traditional system versus, I guess it was the body of evidence.
So that students
We
would
talked about it
still,
extensively like a couple months ago.
students, I don't think we were talking about changing the grading per se, because students will still receive grades for the courses at the course level, but that won't drive what equates to their evidence for graduation. Their evidence for graduation will be about what they provide to demonstrate their proficiency of the portrait of a learner indicators. Michelle is also on the call. I forgot to point to that. She also has spent a lot of time working on portrait of a learner. I wonder if you want to add anything that's a little clearer, Michelle?
I don't know that I have anything to add that's clearer. I do think that this language gives us the flexibility that we're looking for to shift to that body of evidence and kind of away from solely having courses for graduation. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I just remember having like a really extensive talk a couple months ago about seat time and stuff like that. So I just didn't know if this like covers all of that or.
It does, because what we're saying is it's not enough to say that you sat in your algebra class and didn't fail your algebra class for the 120 hours, and that's evidence that you're proficient. So it's actually shifting it so that you have to build your evidence to demonstrate that you're proficient.
Okay, gotcha.
Can you talk to, just for a second, why you have and or other flexible pathways as opposed to just and?
Yeah, we actually had a conversation about it, and the reason is that if you take out one of those things, then it sounds like it's one or the other only. And it's not likely that somebody would do only, like even right now, kids are doing courses and most kids are accessing some flexible pathway. Like that's a Vermont law that's we've been working towards for a long time. So that's why and or.
So meaning not necessarily that we'll use the more, the or, but more the and, right? So does that make sense? I mean, I'm just trying to nail down, I guess, is there a potential for it just being body of evidence versus flexible pathways?
It is now. There's an option to just do body of evidence, really. If you were to do FPA right now, the way we have it, you could do just evidence.
Okay.
But isn't it what it's saying that it's from, like it could potentially be that it's either from your courses that you're taking in classroom, or you could potentially be doing it through other pathways like a job or community service and present that body of evidence, but it's rare that you would have someone doing it 100% just via that flexible pathways with
Right.
no coursework happening.
So if you just use the word "and,"
Mhm.
then it sounds like you have to do
Do
both.
both of them.
And if you only
I got
use "or," then it sounds like you have to do one or the other.
Right. So if you drill it down to the individual,
Yeah.
they can do, I got it
Yeah.
now. But
It's
from a
not
system
likely.
perspective,
Yeah, it's not likely that somebody would do one or the other. It's not even likely right now. Like, even right now, kids who are in FPA and doing a mastery transcript and creating evidence are still taking courses. So it's very unusual for somebody, I can't even think of one person who hasn't taken a single class or has only taken classes. Like, it's very uncommon.
Okay, I gotcha.
It's more of a it tends to be somewhat of a hybrid
I mean,
situation.
yeah, we've already got kids doing dual enrollment, doing ELOs. Those are common structures in our system already. So, yeah, it's not really anything. If you take out the and or the or, then it
Changes the meaning, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, if we're working on language for motion, we want it to be, we want it to cover both those things.
Got it.
For those of you who've been on the board for a while, you remember that when the board was writing those 3 board goals, that was the one that was hardest to write. And we struggled with how do we encapsulate this so that we're not limiting any opportunities and we're getting closer to like what our ideal state is. So I think that this allows us the flexibility we need to work towards what we believe is the ideal state.
Makes sense. That's what I was trying to get to. Is this a limiter or is this broadening? And I got it. Yeah, makes sense.
Great. Any other questions, concerns from the board? So I'm happy to make the motion. I mean, it's kind of it's exciting in a way because it's the culmination and solidifying something that I think started pre-COVID, if I'm not mistaken, when we really dove in and did the work with the consultants and everything. So it's nice. I know it's been a lot of work behind the scenes to get to this place. So excellent. So I will make the motion. Do you want me to reiterate the language, Lynn? So the class of 2028 and beyond will use a body of evidence from courses and or other flexible pathways to demonstrate proficiency in the portrait of a learner indicator skills required for graduation. By roll, Kat.
Aye.
Erin.
Aye.
Sarah.
Aye.
Akua.
Aye.
And Mary is an aye. Great.
Thank you. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time talking to you. I'm going to ask Courtney to go into my other slideshow. I want to talk about what's been happening recently around Vermont's education funding system and Act 127. So we've been talking for several years around this law. So I think that this board is well versed on what this law was intended to do. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the problems that are ahead that have become very evident to me, in particular in the last week, along with several of my colleagues as well. So, go ahead, Courtney. So I'm going to start by just talking about the intention behind the law. So there are really 3 big ideas, and understand that this is a really complicated law that I'm trying to define in its simplest terms for anybody who might be listening and for board members as well. So the intention behind the law really is to acknowledge, for one thing, that it costs more to educate some students than it costs to educate other students. So by way of example, if you're a high school student, it costs more to educate you than it costs to educate an elementary student. It costs more to educate a student who is emerging multilingual, a student who is in special education, or a student who is economically disadvantaged. So this is resulting in per pupil weight adjustments under this new law. So we, because we serve a community that has a relatively high level of students who are economically disadvantaged as one of our metrics, we actually gained substantial tax capacity in the number of pupils under the new weights. The intention is that systems like ours, who have been historically disadvantaged by the previous system, are intended to be able to add more opportunities for students without increasing the local homestead tax liability in the district. That's the basic premise behind this law, is it's that, trying to equalize. It matters less about your zip code and more about all Vermont students having more equitable opportunities. In order to be able to change the funding system like this, one of the things that the legislators contemplated was we have systems who have been historically disadvantaged, and we have systems who have been historically advantaged. So we need to have the flexibility to be able to increase our opportunities, while at the same time, the historically advantaged systems need some time to be able to think about whether or not there are things that they could cut out of their spending plans. So in order to, I would say, soften that hit, one of the things that the legislators contemplated was a 5-year, 5% tax rate capacity for those systems who lost tax capacity because they lost students under the new weighting mechanism. So it was intended to just provide them a softer landing to get to the place where they ultimately need to be in 5 years. So in the law, they embedded what I'm kind of referring to as a checks and balance. So what the legislators contemplated is that there is a point in your spending where you could trigger what's called a rate review process. So if a district's FY24, so this year's spending plan, compared to next year, FY25, if their per pupil education spending increases by more than 10%, that district will be required to submit their budget to a rate review committee. The metrics, as I dug into the law, that rate review committee is supposed to use to determine whether or not their budget is doing what it's intended to do, is that they're looking at, are those increases, are there excessive increases in per pupil education spending in the district? Are the causes for those increases within the district's control? So an example of that would be, did they get 37 new tuition students that they have to now pay high school tuition for that were unanticipated? So that's an out of control. So to be looking at, were those causes for that significant increase within or outside of their control, and whether or not those were supported by good cause. Is there a good reason behind it? So if it meets all the metrics, there's no problem, they'll pass through the tax rate review committee. So if they do not meet those metrics, then the homestead property tax rate that for that community would otherwise be capped shall be increased to the actual homestead property tax rate for this next and the subsequent 4 years. So right now under the law, everyone who has lost capacity has that tax rate cap of 5% protection for each of the next 5 years. But if their spending triggers a rate review, they could lose their cap for this year. Their community would have to pay their real homestead property tax rate based on their spending plan. And if they lose the cap this year, they don't have it at all for the remaining 4. Does that make sense? Okay. So the reality is, for some of those systems that are at the cap, there's a spending capacity that exists between when they get to the 5% tax rate cap and the 10% increase in their per pupil education spending. That has created an opportunity for these systems to budget for substantial one-time investments in the form of capital projects or investments in reserve funds. without having those increases have any impact on their local homestead tax rate. Because they've met the 5% cap, but they're below the 10% increase in their per pupil education spending. So they're protected in any money that they spend between here and here. So it's created an opportunity that was not likely contemplated in the law. So there's a real dilemma that is existing right now for those systems that get to the 5% tax rate cap. So they're having these tough conversations, and they're some of the things they're having to think about, trying to represent a board level conversation. One of the things they have to think about is we can spend this money, this additional money between the 5% and the 10%, and if we spend it, it won't have any opportunity on our local property tax rate. They have to think about some of the things that they're saying or thinking about is why wouldn't we spend this? We have capital needs, and we know the way the education funding system works is that if other systems get big bonds approved, we end up having that impact our dollar yield. So they're contemplating, like, how is that different? The other conversations that are likely happening is we have deferred maintenance in our schools because Vermont has been a system that has not had a construction funding mechanism, state construction aid funding mechanism for, I think, nearly 20 years. So some of the conversations are around that. We have all of these needs. This money could be utilized for those needs. The other reality is people are looking at this and saying, the state's going to have to figure out how to pay for this. This opportunity has been left in the law. We're not going to have to pay for this because we've had to hit the tax rate cap. So one thing I want to be really clear about is that I don't believe in these conversations that there's any ill intention at play by leaders or by board members. The systems are looking at what they can do for their school communities under the law between the 5% cap and the 10% per pupil increase in education spending. So, in order to pay for those added liabilities in the education fund, we have to think about how does money get generated in the education fund. So Morgan talks to you when we go through the budgeting process about those drivers that we don't have control over that impact your tax rate in the end. And one of the last factors that gets applied is the dollar yield. And that's something we got in the December 1 letter that we talk about. And then once we get that number, we can tell you what your anticipated tax rate would be pre-CLA. So in order to raise more money in the education fund, they have to lower that dollar yield, okay? So here's the problem. The increase in spending that is occurring in systems that have hit that 5% tax cap are obligations being made by those systems that will be paid for by homestead property taxpayers only in systems that have not reached the cap. The systems that have not reached the cap in this construct are mostly the historically disadvantaged systems like Franklin Northeast. So they can obligate the spending because the opportunity is there. It can't impact their homestead, their local homestead tax rate, but it does impact our homestead tax rate. So I think I want to talk a little bit about intent. So I think that when you think about scale, in a storm, in a flood, no single raindrop really believes it's responsible for the flood. But when all the raindrops fall, we know what can happen. So again, I don't think there is ill intent in some of the decisions that are getting made. What we're seeing as a result of this opportunity is that there is a compounding effect that is going to be putting a huge burden on Vermont's education funding system that we're going to, as a state, have to figure out how to pay for. And there are only so many ways that we can pay for school funding in the state of Vermont. So the impact is that students who have been educated in historically underfunded school systems, like ours, will be impacted the most by that declining dollar yield. So this will likely result in some communities taking actions to reduce investments in order to be able to offset the impact of that declining dollar yield and their increase to their local residential tax rates. So the intention, as a reminder, behind Act 127 is to create more equitable opportunities for Vermont youth in order to be able to get more equitable outcomes. If there is no course correction right away, we will lose the opportunity, the intention of Act 127. I'm going to run you through a totally made up scenario, okay? This data is not real, it's overly simplified. We have 57 supervisory unions or supervisory districts, our school districts in the state of Vermont. There are far more school budgets than 57, but I'm just using that number to put it in its simplest terms. So let's suppose around 60% of the systems in Vermont, which would be around 35 of those 57 school districts, hit their 5% tax rate cap. And let's suppose in each of those systems, those boards have conversations and they say, we have this opportunity between the 5% and the 10% for one-time capital reserve or capital project investments. And on average, let's suppose that each system chooses to invest $2.85 million towards a project or a reserve. So if you multiply that by the number of systems at cap, we're talking about an additional $100 million that we have to figure out how to pay for in the ed fund. So how can we pay this bill? $100 million is a lot of money. We can lower the dollar yield. And in this scenario, 35 districts that were at cap, so there are 27 districts left in this scenario. So those hypothetical 22 systems who are not at cap can raise the money to cover money spent but not raised by the 35 capped systems. So those 22 systems will likely pull out any extra planned opportunities for those students who have been historically disadvantaged by our previous funding system in order to try to impact the burgeoning tax rate that is going to happen. Another lever that the state has is the state can look at what is going to happen to the non-homestead property tax rate. So the state can push on that lever a little bit. That'll impact landowners, anyone that owns acreage that's not tied to their homesteads, second homeowners, business owners, owners of rental property, which I think we can assume will indirectly drive up rental costs. And the other thing that they can do is they could adjust the formula that's connected to the income sensitivity portion of how people in poverty pay their property taxes. So they can move that formula up or down to raise more or less money for those systems, for those people who qualify for income sensitivity. Then there are no other levers that exist in the ed funding system unless the state were to choose to put more money aside into the ed funding system through some sort of taxation or other revenue source. I think personally that's highly unlikely that they would choose to do that. So I just want to, as a reminder, go back and think about who's impacted by a lower dollar yield. Remember, as the dollar yield goes down, we generate more money to pay for those obligations. The systems who have reached the 5% tax rate cap will not be impacted by a lower dollar yield. The 22 systems that are below the 5% tax rate cap will be impacted by the lower dollar yield and will, as a result, see an increase in their homestead property tax rates. So what is behind this, if you think about this kind of spending, is that tax commissioner's letter when the dollar yield was sent in December, they were making some estimates based on where business managers reported in November they thought their spending would land. Given what's happening right now, I think that it is a very fair assumption, and I don't even think it's an assumption, I think it is certain that that dollar yield was originally based on a grossly underestimated number for education spending across the state of Vermont. So let's talk about those 22 systems again, and let's think about, in that made-up scenario that I just described for you, what capacity likely remains in those 22 systems. So as the tax rates in these systems get adjusted by that lower dollar yield in an attempt to generate that extra $100 million gap in the Vermont Ed Fund, let's talk about system number one. So as that dollar yield gets lower, let's say that system number one could generate an extra $1 million before that system hits the 5% tax rate cap. Once that system gets to that point and they hit the 5% tax rate cap, that's it. You can't get any more money out of that system because they're now protected by the 5% tax rate cap. And let's say that each of these other 21 systems could generate $1 million before they hit the 5% tax rate cap. Once they hit it, you can't take any more money out of those systems. So at that point, we have to ask the question, could this fundamentally break Vermont's education funding system? If you've got a $100 million amount of money that you have to raise from the obligations, and you only have the capacity to raise another $22 million, and again, remember, I'm overly simplifying this. There's $78 million that we have to figure out how to pay for. So where does the money come from if every school in Vermont is driven to the 5% tax rate cap? And adjusting the dollar yield any lower no longer has any ability to raise money for Vermont's education funding system. Then what? I think it's clear when you think about the growing impact, when you think about the compounding effect of what's happening right now, that we're in the place where we can see a crisis right ahead of us, and our legislators are uniquely positioned to be a part of a solution that could serve as a course correction. And right now, a course correction is desperately needed. So I think that in the last several days, our legislators are beginning to see more and more clearly what is lying ahead. I know that you, as board members, heard from your organization today in terms of the reality of how this is impacting our education funding system. So I think there are several factors that the legislature will be thinking about, several things that they could do to course correct. So they could really get clearer, they could change which systems are actually eligible for that cap. They also could change what triggers the rate review. So for example, instead of being able to go to the 5% tax rate cap and then not trigger rate review until you get 10% increase year over year on your per pupil spending, they could trigger the rate review once your system hits the 5% tax rate cap. Remember the checks and balance that I talked about before? If a system goes before the rate review and they don't meet the metrics in the rate review, they don't have the cap for that year. they have to pay the total impact on their local property taxes, and they no longer have access to the tax rate cap in years 2 through 5 of this transition. So when we really look at the compounding effect of what's happening in the education system, we don't have time to wait and see what plays out this year. We need a course correction now. The time is absolutely urgent. And one of the things that I think it's important for all of us to remember is that, and community members that might be watching this, is that we all have a voice, and we can be communicating with our legislators about how this is impacting our system, and even more important, we can be looking at the totality of how this is going to impact Vermont taxpayers as a whole. I think it's our responsibility to be able to help people to see this and understand what's coming our way if no action is taken. So if I could say anything to the Vermont legislators, if they were in the room today, I would ask them to look ahead and really see what is coming, what is likely coming, and think about what's the intent of the 5% tax rate cap and the impact that will occur if rate review doesn't occur until the 10% spending threshold. And I'd also just ask that the legislators remember that any legislative action to address this current reality is going to be uncomfortable. And I would ask them to remember that there are unintended equity implications in this opportunity in the law that are actually counter to the law's original intent. So it takes courage, it will take courage to do the right thing and to course correct so that we can ensure that the foundational premise that this law was written on still exists at the end of this funding year. So I know that was a lot, and I'm wondering if anyone has any questions or comments.
I appreciate you bringing it to our attention. I mean, it's certainly a moment of reckoning, and it's really troubling and discouraging to find ourselves in this position where there's clearly a loophole that's having an unintended downstream effect for the very districts and systems that were meant to be most advantaged and supported and uplifted by Act 127. Yeah, it's it's kind of an unfortunate turn of events, and it doesn't seem as though the legislators saw this potential loophole coming.
I don't know how they could have, given the impact that this could have, I don't think that they saw this.
Yeah.
So how did this all come to light if they didn't realize it until you said this was starting to come out in the last week or so?
So systems are now in the place that we are at, where they are, they're starting to warn their budgets. So things are much clearer about what things have been added to budgets, and for those that have been advantaged by the weights, we have talked about what we've added into our budgets based on the intention of the law and more opportunities for our students. And there are other systems who have been building budgets, and they've been talking about the opportunity that exists for them in the form of, we know it's not free money, but I think that there's a temptation to look at this as free money and an opportunity in the system. So those things there's a growing acknowledgement about the magnitude of how frequently that's happening.
And that was kind of my next question. Everyone's in the same boat, headed to vote in early March. So, are we basically just kind of like time will tell? Like there's a month and a half or so before all these different districts could potentially, partake in the situation or the scenario that you've kind of played out for us.
I think that and Morgan, please jump in if I'm going in the wrong direction, but I think I'm right in my thinking. I think that in the next month, there are going to be hard conversations that are happening. There has to be hard conversations that are happening in Montpelier. We're heading to a place we can't go to as a state without those conversations, and those conversations need to lead to action. And if action happens and they clarify the intent and they think about what triggers rate review, I suspect that because of what happens if you don't meet the metrics of the rate review, you subject your community to the potential for losing the tax rate protection, that 5% tax rate cap, from for this year and for the next 4 years. So I strongly suspect if action is taken and the legislature says, no, that wasn't the intention of the law, we're going to look at each of the budgets that gets to the tax rate cap, I think there will be communities that go back to the table and say, wait a minute, we saw this as an opportunity, however, we're not going to include this if this could put our communities at risk of not having the protection of the 5% tax rate cap this year and for the next 4 years.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think based on the conversations that I've been having with folks around the state, those changes are right now happening hourly, especially as we hear that certain legislators are interested in exploring different quote-unquote fixes to this. So I think that is making people nervous. I think people are on some level realizing the impact of it and reconsidering decisions based on that. And then to kind of tie it to our two home districts, when we warned budgets earlier this month in NMV, we were about, I think, a penny down from the previous year in terms of the equalized rate, and in Enosburg we were 2 or 3 cents down compared to last year in terms of equalized rates. So we were going to the voters with a tax cut. The yield number has changed. The yield has dropped. It was basically tied to interpretation of the grand list in the CLA. The yield dropped about $280. That pushed both of those rates up by 3.5 cents. It would only take another similarly sized drop to push NMV into that cap provision, where their tax rate could not go any higher and they could not raise any more money off their grand list to pay for all these costs that Lynn had mentioned. Enosburg Richford would not be too far behind that in terms of a dropping yield. And so I think the scenario that Lynn painted about getting to a point where every system in the state has hit that 5% cap is actually is not unlikely the way things are going.
Thank you.
But I would say that in the case of our budgets, the SU budget, the NMB and ER, I mean, those are very thoughtful budgets, respectable and integrous budgets that we mapped out with the understanding that we were going to benefit, as we should, from Act 127. So it seems to me that nothing of this development and this kind of perilous situation that we are potentially heading toward, the onus to address it shouldn't be on us to look at our budgets again, because they're respectable budgets meant to uplift our students in this historically disadvantaged system. So it seems that we need to, push on our legislators and potentially on those more advantaged districts that are in this 5 to 10 percent gap, that they're unaware of the impact that those budgets are having that downstream for less advantaged districts. So for me, I feel like we stay the course.
I think they're, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna add that, you know, to your point and even to yours, Lynn, as we think about our legislators and really our state government, that 30,000 feet view, I just went back to refresh my memory because I was at the State of the State where even the governor said affordability and housing are two of the priorities. And so as we look at that and really have those conversations with our legislators, just remind them that, you know, this is counter even to that goal.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So really the onus at the moment is on the legislature to recognize that it's pretty urgent because it's budget season.
Right. I think the reality is there's so much volatility right now with how the way Vermont's system works. There's this false notion that you pay for your own schools, but you really don't because it's a statewide education system. So I think the volatility exists because we don't know if other systems will get those budgets approved, if the legislature will choose to course correct. So I think that at this point, we made the decision out of fear of the yield to say, we're gonna take our opportunities out for our students. That would be devastating because this is something that we've been so historically underfunded in terms of comparison data with other parts of the state. When you look at our per pupil, we're always at the bottom of the list in terms of how much we spent on each of our students. So it would feel devastating. The reality is, when voters go to the polls in March, it's gonna be a scary number in their projected tax rate because we are going to use the true yield. The last number, we literally just got it on Friday, but we have to be transparent with our community and show them that. So the number isn't gonna be zero anymore. The number will look different. It's not gonna look like we've decreased spending pre-CLA. So the reality is we also have to elevate this conversation so that people can understand this is not driven by the decisions that we have necessarily put into our budget. We did increase spending in our budget as we were supposed to do to advantage our previously disadvantaged students. So I appreciate your sentiment and I think that's the right move for the board is to hold tight. We've worked hard on this budget. We've been thinking for years what we would do with this opportunity and I think we feel good about what we did with the budget, and the reality is it will be challenging to pass budgets in this cycle. If we are unsuccessful, I'm gonna try to do the glass half full piece, and if we're unsuccessful, at least at that time, if we have to relook at budgets, we will have more information. We'll know was there legislative action, we'll know, which budgets passed in the state and which didn't, so we'll have more real data about where people are landing and what the overall impact is on the Vermont Education Fund. I think this board knows I try hard not to be catastrophic in my thinking. I try to be pretty level in my thinking, but when the data started to become visible to me, it's very troubling to think about the magnitude of what's sitting right in front of us if there isn't a course correction. And I hope people are listening. And I hope people really think about the actions that need to be taken right now in Montpelier to course correct. Anything else?
No, thank you so much, Lynn, for bringing that to everyone's attention. And, I just would encourage anyone who has the time and the appetite to reach out to our legislators and try to push on them and because it's gonna imperil our ability to uplift all our students and build our system, which is the antithesis of what Act 127 was intended to do. I mean, we've been kind of eagerly anticipating this, this opportunity to build our capacity in this system so that we can better serve our students. So I'm really hoping that we get some traction with the legislature and they see the potential perilousness of this.
I agree.
So I think we stay tight and steady and wait and see and try to communicate to our community that these budgets are very thoughtful and respectable budgets, but I'm always sympathetic to the tax hit and how that feels and lands, especially for people in our community who are struggling. It's such a delicate balance. So hopefully there'll be a course correction at the state level so that we can do both, build our system and not harm our taxpayers.
I guess there's Mary, I appreciate all of your thoughts and sentiments. There's one more piece I just want to think about because, when I think about this, I think about the impact it's going to have on our students. That's the lens that you've hired me to look at my work through, and I feel like we try pretty hard to look at opportunities for our students. When I look at the totality of this picture, I'm also looking at how this is going to impact Vermont as a state and taxpayers across our system, because there may be local residential taxpayers who hit the cap in some communities that won't feel this dramatic increase, but that doesn't mean that their friends and neighbors who own non-homestead properties won't feel devastating effects of this. And it doesn't mean that their community members who are economically disadvantaged won't feel devastating effects of this, because if they adjust the non-homestead rate, that will have an impact on all of those property owners and renters, and a lot of our families are renters. And it's also going to be a double whammy, because it's also going to impact for those people living in poverty who own homes, their income sensitivity formula. So I think that as we contend with this, it's not just, how your decisions impact your community or your decisions impact someone else's community. I think that it's important that everyone, to your point, Akua, gets at that 30,000 foot elevation and think about Vermont as a whole. Like, we've got to take care of our state, and we're in a desperate situation right now where we have a huge housing shortage. We have issues with our labor, our workforce, and these could have effects that we can't even imagine yet long term. So there just has to be a course correction.
Does this impact like the information that would go to the town books, the town reports, and then the flyer that goes out? Like, has any of that gone to print yet? And this change in the last week? Because like you're saying, what we looked at last in our respective boards is now different. So where does that put us with the information that is being conveyed to the communities?
Sure. Nothing has been published yet. The only change in terms of the budget as we present it will be the yield amount that we're using, and that then impacts the tax rates. But there's there'll be no change to the budget or the revenue, any of the details that we send out. It's really about the projected tax rate.
So, Kat, I've been thinking about that. I had a long car ride today, and I got to think about a lot of things. So, we've been writing our reports, and we're building this budget report for the annual report. It's going to go to press very soon. So we're gonna communicate what we know right now, and we're gonna put that, as Morgan said, the new number in. But the reality is, by the time people read that, there's so much time is going to pass, it'll be probably 3 weeks before it gets in their hand, and who knows where we'll be at that point.
Are we gonna add, and can we add some kind of disclaimer to the materials that we're distributing? People something?
Yeah, I will have something in my report, talking to the fluidity of the yield. The reality is that very few people read that, and they, skip ahead to the bottom line. And to the extent we get them to show up at a meeting, we can educate them. To the extent that we put stuff out on social media and that gets shared, we can educate them. So it will be out there, but people need to be receptive to reading it.
I think the other thing that we could do, if the public is watching this meeting, maybe encourage your friends and neighbors to watch this part of the discussion about Vermont's education funding system, because I think it is critically important to understand this piece so that you can understand what you're seeing when you go to vote on your school budget, not just here, but in communities across the state.
Okay, well, please keep us apprised.
We will.
Thank you so much.
There's one other piece under legislative update, and I'm gonna give this piece to Morgan under PCBs.
So there are some proposed changes to the system, the way that we're investigating schools for PCBs, and I believe it's in the early stages still in the legislature, but the short story is that it would take the initial testing away from the Agency of Education and put it in the Department of Environmental Conservation. So it would pull out some of the lift on Vern and I and your principals and put that on the DEC to work. It would only, for us, impact Richard High School and Enosburg High School, which are the two that are still remaining to get that initial level of testing. So that's where that bill is going. I think we can kind of all see where the potential for increased funding for PCB remediation is going if this is where education funding is going in general. So I think the picture is still pretty grim on that front.
There are a couple other things that are happening that I didn't write down, but I'll just mention briefly. Mental health is continuing to be an issue that there are a lot of conversations happening about. I'll be testifying within the next probably week around mental health and impact on Vermont's education systems. There are some conversations around seclusion and restraint in public schools, and that right now lives at the state board level under what's called the Rule 4500 series. And the legislature is contemplating bringing that into the body of law. So they're contemplating things like, well, I'm not going to say yet because I haven't seen what they're going to put forward yet. If it's out there, I haven't read it, but I do know there are conversations around, re-looking at what's allowable, what's not under seclusion and restraint under that totality of the Rule 4500 rules. So that's the only thing I know there are lots of other moving parts, as you can imagine. What I just shared with you has taken up about all of the capacity I have in the last 5 or 6 days to really wrap my head around and think about how to communicate and break this down into the simplest possible terms for people to be able to understand. So we'll keep you informed. I know this board doesn't have another meeting until the middle of April, but we will make sure that the local boards are updated on what's happening in the legislative system. And I just have my executive session.
Yeah, we'll circle back to that. Okay, thank you. Alright, so moving on to central office updates, Dominic.
Yeah, just a couple of quick updates. One, we still have the Sheldon position is still open as of now. So we're still have Thomas splitting duties between central office and Sheldon to keep them afloat. We are having applicants trickle in here and there, so hopefully we'll find a good fit sooner or later. And the other one is just a quick update on where we are with our new websites and our associated app that will go along with it. We're pretty close. We had a meeting or training today for everyone who posts to social media for any of our schools, since that can now be tied into the new website, so you can, do a single post. You can get it to go to Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever you use for social media, and post to your website all in one shot.
It's a good turnout.
Yeah, it was pretty good. I think we had, around 20?
Yeah.
Around 20 people came to that training, which is a lot more than we've had in previous ones, so which is good.
Representation from every school was there.
Nice.
So we don't have a definite date, but we're getting pretty close. We have another training in a couple weeks for the mass notification part of it. Like this, our service through this company also has something similar to what we've used in the past through School Messenger, as far as being able to send mass phone calls and emails out to families. And this will also have, since there's an app, families will also be able to opt in to push notifications on their phones if they want. And they can choose that per school if they want to get those push notifications. So we're getting close, and hopefully we'll be launching soon.
Great, thank you so much, it's excellent. Leah, Gab.
I think for a highlight, we have an incredible group of teachers working together for our literacy review as we get closer to reaching consensus around a program for K-8. We have some neighboring districts that have welcomed us to come and visit, so there are a couple of districts in the area that are using some of the programs that we're looking at. We've reached, we're in our top 3 right now. And so they've opened their doors, so we're looking at visiting with them at the beginning of February so that teachers can see it in action, which is a very nice bonus for us. We did put out our MTSS framework at the end of last year, which has been helpful for schools as we systematize and become consistent in our approaches to students' needs. And I don't have data to share just because we adjusted our common assessment plan windows after teacher feedback, and so that data is just kind of rolling in for our January.
I will just, Student-Centered Learning Committee, the stakeholder committee meets like right before this meeting, so I never put it in the notes. But they met again today. We had just a couple really good meetings. That's a very active group. I'm really excited to get like some teacher stakeholder feedback in there. They're really enjoying it. It's been fun.
Great, thank you both. And Callie's not here. I had a couple SEL questions.
Do you want to share them, and I'll try my best, and if not, we can get follow-up for sure.
So I was just reading here and was just curious, this, where she talks about this the post-break resets, which I thought was such a great idea, but I was just curious about like an example of like what that looks like.
It's a great question. We did it both in our new teachers and with students. Gab, do you know any details about what it looked like for students?
I do not.
I don't know a specific detail, but I just know the intention was really to like reset expectations and like set students up for success as you're re-entering school.
And then I had a question about the Savers data. I mean, I know we don't have enough over an arc of long enough time to really draw too many conclusions. And then there's just variables, right? Like if you're not if it's not the same cohort, or is it? So that was one question, like, is it the same cohort of students, or from the spring to the fall? Or, because that would impact the kind of changes, or if you have new students coming in who are only taking one of those and not the prior one, then it just kind of skews data. So I was just wondering if moving forward, there's going to be an effort to have kind of like a consistent cohort so that we can gauge in that same group of students what we hope will be forward progress and students scoring higher on these.
I think there's some combination. So for example, the one that you're looking at that is reflected in the bar graphs that show the benchmarks of low, some, and high risk, there's some cohort that remains the same because that's K1, that first one. So that would be last year's kindergarten in this year's first grade. Their data would be in there, but then this year's kindergarten that's reflected in this year would not have had pre-data from last year.
Right.
And then when you look at the 2 through 12, 2 is new, and we didn't break it out by grade level, so I guess what I'm trying to say. So if you're looking at it as the totality of those students, it's a repeat for students in grades 3 through 12.
Gotcha.
The 2 would be adding to that. So I think if we were to get at that level, we probably need to report out by grade level and then do cohorts. So it would be, how does this year's kindergarten connect to next year's first grade?
Right.
To be tracking cohorts. I don't know if, we'd have to talk about if that's the, is that the right level of data that you want, that's gonna increase the amount of data that you get substantially, because
Right.
and we would want to keep it at the elevation that it's at the system level, so that we can keep the N big enough so that nothing could possibly be identifiable.
Right, right, totally. Okay, no, and that makes a lot of sense, and certainly we don't ever want to have anything be identifiable, and I mean, it's really instructive, even if there's some variability around the cohorts and you're looking at a wide swath of students.
Yes. Mary, when you and I pre-meet each month and we went through the agenda, you asked some really good questions, and I went back to Callie and she added in the pieces around, what does that look like? So the social behavior, when you're measuring, what is that score broken down into? Like, what are those subscale scores? And so by way of example, the social behaviors are around either students self-identifying or teachers identifying, arguing, cooperating with peers, temper outbursts, disruptive behavior, polite and socially appropriate response toward others, and impulsiveness. So I think her examples around social behaviors and emotional behaviors and academic behaviors were really helpful to tease out, and I think that that's the piece that this data allows us to do, because then if we think about kids who struggle, if we can get to the place where we can identify what's the specific skill that they're struggling with, just like when we're thinking about an academic struggle that might be related to math or to literacy, if we could get down to the skill level, we could think about what does our instruction need to look like in order to help that child become proficient in that skill. So this data is really helpful when it breaks it down into those specific kind of indicators.
Yeah, absolutely. And then my only other question I had on that SEL, if you link over to the sample of the SABRS questions, I was just confused on the bottom of this, on the emotional behavior. I feel sad, I feel nervous, I like to try new things, I'm happy, I'm worried. And then there was just this one that caught my eye, when something bad happens, ... And I was just wondering, did something get cut off? I was just curious how that, what that.
I don't either.
Yeah, it just caught my eye, because I don't know what that's gauging, and if I was wondering, if I don't understand it, does a second grader understand it?
I have a feeling something is, that I feel like the teachers would have elevated if there was something like that, because they have to fill that out. So I don't know that I would recall
I
anybody
think
eligible.
there's something after that.
Okay,
Because
and it's just cut off, I
It seems like
figured,
that's a longer one than the rest of them.
yes.
We should ask Callie.
Yeah.
I was just
That's what it
curious,
seems like.
it just caught my eye.
That would be kind of dark.
Okay, great, thank you. So, Michelle, do you have anything further that you'd like to add and highlight from your report after your spotlight?
The only other thing I will add is that I've talked about the Agency of Education having to monitor special education. And I am in cyclical monitoring, and I can promise you that I spent hours on my submission, but I cannot promise you it's going to turn out, because it is, I was looking at it on the other end, and it's been a struggle in the past, so I have my fingers crossed that it's going to be successful.
It's not always intuitive, clear, or understandable how to meet the metrics by which they measure our proficiency in whatever they're monitoring for. So Michelle's doing her best, and we will all attest to that.
I'm not at all surprised to hear that it's not always clear.
It's not clear.
The metrics are murky.
I'll keep you posted.
Thank you.
And question for you, Michelle, in terms of the 504 eligibility, is this an update to the eligibility for the 504 program? Because I know we had one in existence.
So we have a 504, I guess we have some 504 procedures that were not consistent across the SU, and our forms were not consistent in where we house them, and I was afraid that some students' plans were getting lost and that we weren't all on the same page. So I've been working to create new procedures for FNESU, along with some forms that we can upload into EduClimber so that everybody has the access to it, regardless if a student moves to a different school, doesn't get lost, like all of that part.
Okay.
With some, I guess, some additional training of our 504 coordinators I'm going to do soon.
So it'll be streamlined across all the schools in the district, or districts.
We've been working really hard to like the systems that we have built across the organization to streamline that so that it is not people dependent. So when a leader transitions or a 504 coordinator transitions, that you're relying on other people in that school to train you up. So we want it to be non-people dependent so that the system just keeps rolling as people transition in and out of some of these critical roles.
I want to add it to our website too. People can have access to it and see what that looks like.
Because we've done similar things with the educational support team as kind of another thread off of that MTSS potential plans that students might have. And so we're using EduClimber as our house in order to make sure that all the schools within our district have access to the same consistent forms, the same criterias, everything is there, so it's consistent.
Thank you.
Great. Michelle Irish.
Hi. I don't have anything really to add. I gave you quite a bit of information around the upcoming events we're going to have in our schools with Sweethearts and Heroes. Their focus is really going to be on bullying and social emotional learning. So it will cover, I'm pretty sure every school has an opportunity this spring, some more than others, but there's quite a bit of work that's happening, and I'm really proud of the fact that our schools are getting on board with some of this work.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. Heather?
Not a lot to add really. So one of the things I highlighted was we completed our youth quality assessments that we do annually in all of our sites. We've got some really wonderful, thoughtful program improvement action plans that we're implementing. When we do these, we do spend a lot of time thinking about like personalization around our sites and their student needs and our staff goals, and aligning our goals with like what FNESU is doing as well, so that we're not so that our programs have a really great just continuation of what's going on in the classroom for our students. So you'll see we have work with goal setting for our students. Really love that we have Callie on board now, so instead of contracting out for some support for some of our staff, Callie is working to personalize some training for some of our sites. So that's been pretty exciting. We have a couple of high-profile activities from our students, the Junior Iron Chef competition that Richford will be participating in, and the Adams Family production, which is in a couple of weeks. So if anybody's able to go, it's going to be a great show. We're working on our quarter 3 brochures still. They'll be out soon, and I've been having a really wonderful time spending grant funds for some program kits. Buying drones and I'm trying to think of what else, STEM Lego kits, and it's been attracting other staff members as well because we're providing them some lovely toys to play with. So we're really excited about that.
Awesome. Very cool. So cool. Thanks, Heather. It's great. No change. Dawn.
So I don't have a lot to update. We did get our acceptance letter for the CEP program for all of our schools. So now all of our schools are into the CEP program, which is great. It's going to save a lot of headaches as far as reviews and whatnot. So I'm really happy about that. That was a big accomplishment to get done. Yesterday I completed in-service day for all of the food service staff and had a pretty good turnout with that. We seem to have a pretty successful in-service with different trainings and whatnot. Our supply vendor came and he talked with the staff a lot and really gave the staff a better, clear understanding of different ordering techniques and whatnot that we need to do within our district. So it was really a good training.
Nice, great, thank you so much, Dawn. Gab,
Not too much to add. We got a couple new K-8 enrollments this month, so that's nice. And the K-6 kids are doing kind of like an installation here at the central office in this back space on the 21st of February. They're super excited about it. It's their first like art focused. They've like had art in each of their projects, but this is the one that's focused on art. It's art and empathy, and they've got all kinds of like outside. They're working with like a museum down where Brittany lives, and that person has been giving them some lessons, and they're doing like some work with an artist on portraits, and then they're designing their installation right here in this back room. And they're doing yarn and feedback on each other's work, and it's a very elaborate plan. So if anybody's available on the 21st at 11, between 11 and 12, they're gonna be serving, they're gonna have like a little art opening. That's their event.
Nice. That's lovely, thank you. Fern.
Yeah, not a lot either here. Starting to get wound up for some meetings to sit down with principals to see what they want to take a look at for summer projects. There's some interesting grants that have come down. Heather and I are looking at a couple, and Dawn is also working on another grant for another school for some refrigeration. And we're getting real close to the Richford High wood pellet project. The RFP, Morgan and I took a look at that today. We're getting close there. We'll hopefully within 4 or 5 weeks we'll be able to look at going out to bid on that project. And yeah, just looking at some grants and hopefully be able to land a couple this year.
Nice. Great, thank you. All right, so that brings us to our board business. We have superintendent negotiations coming up, And so what I think, we're looking at doing those in early February. We do not have a regular SU meeting, so we'll need to, call a special meeting in order to do that. Courtney's gonna send out a doodle and look for kind of what the optimal time is for everyone, that we can find a date that aligns with everyone's busy schedules. And once we settle on that date, then if everyone wants to keep an eye out in your emails, I'll be sending along the most recent evaluation that the board did not too long ago, but not everyone who's now on this board participated in that, so it'll just be helpful for everyone to have that in advance of negotiations. So we'll all keep in touch about that. Amazing that the daffodils or the crocuses may be coming up by our next meeting, April 17th, so.
It's a great way to look at it.
Yes, right, let's be optimistic. We could have 6 feet of snow on the fields, or the crocuses could be up. Which will it be? I'm leaning toward the crocuses. So, great. So I'm gonna make a motion to enter executive session, do that by roll, and then everyone who's not staying excused. Kat?
Talk about the teacher.
Yes, this is to talk about teacher retention strategy, yes. Erin?
I need to recuse myself on this one.
Okay, thank you. Sarah?
Aye.
Akua?
Aye.
And Mary is an aye. So great. Everyone take care, get home safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. So, we are out of executive session. We have, a motion on the table. The motion is to direct the board chair to sign a side letter related to the teacher retention strategy discussed in executive session. We'll do that by roll. Kat?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Akua?
Aye.
And Mary is an aye, and Erin was recused from that. Great. Okay. And so now I'm gonna make a motion to re-enter executive session, and this time we are discussing administrator negotiations. Do that by roll. Kat?
Aye.
Erin?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Akua?
Aye.
And Mary is an aye. So we are exiting executive session at 8:26 with no motions pending. And I'll make a motion then to adjourn unless anything else that the board wishes to discuss. All right, so motion to adjourn. Erin?
Aye.
Pat?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Akua?
Aye.
And Mary is an aye. Thank you all so much.